Good morning, children. Sairam. Welcome back to your English online session. Children, today we will continue in English 2.4, The Fall of Troy, Part 2. Now, children, this part tells us that how Troy was finally defeated and nothing was left of the proud, rich city. But before that, let us learn some new words and phrases and how to frame sentences. Now, the first word is soundly. Now, children, soundly means completely and deeply. Soundly means completely and deeply. The children were sleeping soundly. The children were sleeping soundly. Next word, in vain. Now, in vain means without success. In vain means without success. Let us frame a sentence. In the end, the captain's hard work was all in vain by the loss of the match. Means it was not successful. In the end, the captain's hard work was all in vain by the loss of the match. Now, next phrase, taken by surprise. Taken by surprise. Now, children, it means to suddenly attack a place or an opponent when they are not ready. To suddenly attack a place or an opponent when they are not ready. For example, the armed forces seem to have been taken by surprise by the ferocity of the attack. The armed forces seem to have been taken by surprise by the ferocity of the attack. Now, children, the next word is resisted. Now, children, resisted means to fight against something or someone that is attacking you. To fight against something or someone that is attacking you. Let us frame a sentence. The soldiers resisted the enemy attacks for 2 days. The soldiers resisted the enemy attacks for 2 days. Now, children, let us proceed to part 2. But before that, let us have a quick recap of what we had already covered. Now, children, we had already studied that Troy was defeated not by force but by a trick or a plan devised by Odysseus. Now, what was his plan? His plan was to build a huge wooden horse with the great Greek fighters hiding inside it. And they pretended that they had sailed back to their city. They had left one Greek to persuade the Trojans that this huge wooden horse was an offering to the sea god, and it is big enough, huge enough, so that it will not enter inside their city, otherwise the luck will favor the Trojans. But the Trojans, they decided that they will drag this horse inside the city. They did not pay attention to the wise advice of their priest. They decided that they will drag the horse inside the city. Now, let us see what happens next. All that day, the Trojans feasted and drank and celebrated. After all their celebrations, they went to sleep and slept soundly. But the day of rejoicing was soon followed by a night of terror and death. So, children, after dragging the horse inside the city, they all feasted and drank and celebrated because they assumed that Greeks had sailed back to their city and this war was over. The fighting had come to an end. So, they all feasted, that is, they ate and drank, okay, and they celebrated. But after all their celebrations, they all went to sleep and slept soundly. But the day of rejoicing was soon followed by a night of terror and death. The Greek ships had not sailed far. As soon as they were hidden by an island, they had lowered their sails and dropped anchor and waited for the night. In the darkness, the fleet sailed back, and the leading ship, which was Agamemnon's, bore a red light high on its mast. The Greek, who was watching for the return of the fleet, crept to the wooden horse and gave the signal. The side of the horse opened. The Greeks climbed out and opened the gates. The whole Greek army entered the sleeping city. Immediately, the Greeks set fire to the houses and towers and palaces and began to burn and kill. Now, children, the Greek ships, they had not sailed far. As soon as they were hidden by an island, they had lowered their sails and dropped anchor and waited for night. So, children, they had not gone very far. They were hidden by an island and they had lowered their ships and dropped anchor and they were waiting for night. And in the darkness, the fleet sailed back, and the leading ship, which was Agamemnon's, Agamemnon, he was brother of Menelaus, okay, bore a red light high on its mast. Now the Greek, they were watching for the return of the fleet. They crept to the wooden horse and gave the signal. The side of the horse opened. The Greeks climbed out and opened the gates, and the whole Greek army entered the sleeping city. Immediately, the Greeks set fire to houses and towers and palaces and began to burn and kill. So now here, children, you can see that the Greek ships, they had not sailed far, and Agamemnon, he bore a red light high on the mast, and the Greek, they were waiting for the ships to return. Okay, they were waiting for the return of the Greek ships. Okay, and then the Greek, they gave the signal, and immediately this Greek army, it entered the city. Troy was filled with the sight of leaping flames and the sound of shouting and the noise of weapons and the cries of weeping women. The sleeping Trojans sprang out of their beds, but they were taken by surprise. Their enemies were inside their walls, and many of the Trojans were killed before they could put on their armor and seize their weapons. So children, the Greeks, they all entered in the city, and Troy was filled with the sight of leaping flames. They started to burn, they started to kill everyone, and there was sound of shouting and noises of weapons, cries of weeping women. And the sleeping Trojans, they sprang out of their beds, but then they were taken by surprise. They were not ready. The enemies were right inside their walls, and many of the Trojans were killed before they could put on their armor and seize their weapons. So children, just have a look. They all were fighting, but it was in vain because they were taken by surprise. They were not prepared at all, and they were not ready. They could not even put their armor and seize their weapons. A bright light lit up the night sky as palaces and houses, temples and towers went up in flames. The Trojans fought as well as they could, but it was all in vain. Old King Priam was killed with all his brave sons. Hector's wife and his old mother and sister were carried off as slaves by the conquerors. Their fate was in contrast to Helen's when King Menelaus rushed through the city looking for her and found her in her palace. So children, a bright light lit up the night sky because the palaces, houses, temples and towers, they all went up in flames. The Trojans, they fought as well as they could, but it was in vain. It was without success. Old King Priam, he was the king of Troy. He was killed with all his brave sons. Prince Hector, they all were killed. Hector's wife and his old mother and sister, they were carried off as slaves by the conquerors, that is the Greeks. Their fate was in contrast to Helen's when King Menelaus rushed through the city looking for her and found her in her palace. So children, you can see the city with It was in leaping flames, within the sight of leaping flames, because they had burned the city and killed many Trojans. She hung her head in shame and sorrow as she faced her former husband. Her voice was choked with emotion and she could not speak. But Menelaus forgave her and she went back with him, for it was only Aphrodite who had turned her heart away from her home and her husband and her child. When morning came, nothing was left of the proud, rich city that had resisted attack for 10 years. So, children, Helen, her head she hung her head in shame and sorrow when she faced her former husband. Her voice was choked with emotion because she could not speak. But Menelaus, forgave her and she went back with him because he knew that it was only Aphrodite who had turned her heart away from her home and her husband and her child. Now, children, Aphrodite, she was a Greek goddess of beauty. Now, children, why she had turned her heart away from her home and her husband and her child? Now, children, there's a story of this Aphrodite. Now, children, basically here there was a judgment day wherein Paris, that is the prince of Troy, he was the judge, wherein he was supposed to give the golden apple to the most beautiful and the fairest goddess. So Aphrodite, she had promised Paris that she would get Helen, she would win Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, for him. So therefore Aphrodite had helped Paris. He was a prince of Troy, and therefore she had turned her heart away from her husband and her child. Okay, so she had basically diverted Helen's mind from her husband and her child. So when morning came, nothing was left of the proud, rich city that had resisted attack for 10 years, but it was totally ruined. Okay, so now this rich city, it was totally ruined. Okay, so children, in this lesson, the fall of Troy, we learnt that this rich and prosperous city of Troy was defeated not by force but by a trick or a plan devised by Odysseus. And the Trojans, they did not pay heed to the wise advice of their priest, and they broke down a part of their strong wall in order to drag the horse in. And the Greeks, they had finally defeated the Trojans. So we had learnt this. I hope you have understood this lesson, the fall of Troy. Now children, in English workshop, at the end of this lesson, there are some activities. Now the first one, find antonyms of the following from the passage. So the words are given and you have to find the antonyms from the passage. For example, barren, fertile, offended, pleased, cowardly, bravely, peace, war. So you have to find these antonyms from the passage. Now children, these three you have to do it on your own as a homework. You have to write in your notebooks. Surrender, exposed, defenseless. You have to find the antonyms for these words from the passage and you will write in your notebooks. Now the second one, find synonyms of the following words used in the story. For example, great hero, brave. Beautiful woman, pretty. Fight here used as a verb, attack. Rich city, prosperous. So you have to find the synonyms from the passage. Now children, these are for you to do. Safe, strong city. So you will find the synonyms which are used in the story. Okay, you have to write from the passage. Now next one, list all the words related to war. Now children, it is like a word register. Okay, I have just jotted down some words. Enemy, attack, fight, strong, fortress, siege, kill, burn, weapons, armor, arrow, wounded, death. So you can find some more, okay, and you can add in this list. Okay, so you all have to write in your notebook. Now next one, note the given constructions carefully and then use them to express your ideas. Now just have a look at this first one. A horse big enough to hold men inside it. So you have to express in your own idea now using big enough. So here I have solved one example. Our school auditorium is big enough to hold a grand function. Our school auditorium is big enough to hold a grand function. Second one, the Greeks were tired of the long war. Now the answer is, we were tired of our long journey. So these two I have done for you. Now these ones are you to do. Okay, you have to do it in your notebooks. They were afraid of the long voyage home too. They were afraid of the long voyage home too. So you have to express in your own ideas. They made it too big to go inside your city. They made it too big to go inside your city. They were so excited that they paid no attention to his words. They were so excited that they paid no attention to his words. So you have to, similarly, you have to frame your own sentences and do as a homework in your notebooks. Now children, this activity also very important. You have to put the following events in the order in which they took place and number them accordingly. So this, children, you have to do in your notebooks. You have to arrange this in the order of the events of the occurrence and how it had occurred. Accordingly you have to write this events. Okay, so I have given this for you, but I want all of you to write in your notebooks this, children. Okay, so the first one, just have a look. The cunning Odysseus thought of a plan. This is the first event. Okay, then the second one, the Greeks built a huge wooden horse. So that was the second event. Okay, then the third one, the Greek heroes hid inside the horse. The fourth one, the Greeks burned their tents and sailed away. Fifth, the Trojans were happy to see the Greek ships go. That is the fifth event. Then the sixth one is the Trojans found a Greek man under the big wooden horse. The next event, the priest warned the Trojans not to break the wall. The eighth one, they broke down part of the wall and brought the horse in. Next, the Trojans slept soundly. The 10th one, the Greeks came out of the horse and opened the gates. 11th one, the Greek army entered the city. The last one, Troy was burnt down. So children, this all you have to write in your notebooks. Okay, so I hope you have understood this, right? This you can do only if you understand the story thoroughly, you understand it properly, and then you can write this. So I have given you the answer so that you can write in your notebooks. So children, I hope you have understood this story, the fall of Troy. Thank you, my dear students. Have a good day. Take care of yourselves. Sai Ram.